pleasure to have all of you, and also privileged to have Navid Asgari, who is Associate Professor of Strategy, as you can see, at Fordham University in New York. Navid has done some really cutting-edge academic work on biopharma alliances. I mean, how do you create a competitive advantage with alliances? The kind of work that Navid has done up to now, at least, I've not seen that from any other source. So we asked if he could kindly share a few thoughts with us, and perhaps even have some case studies. I think, Navid, you have a couple of case studies. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. Navid will take us 25-30 minutes to go through a number of slides. We will have a Q&A session. If you could kindly put your questions, please, in the chat box, and then we will take them from about 1:35 onwards for about 15 or 20 minutes. And I think it's better instead of Navid being interrupted as he speaks. So Navid, over to you.
Thank you, Salman, and I really appreciate it. Thanks for the introduction. So just a question. So can you see my full screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Very well.
Okay, because I have the panel, I have the video panel on that side. Okay, great. So good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, really depending on where you are in the world. So it is my great pleasure to talk to our guest at Basel HCD. Before I start, I would like to thank my good friend, Salman Bukhari, whom I had the pleasure of knowing since we were both living in Singapore. I also had the pleasure of working with him as a member of the Basel HCD's advisory panel. I'm also grateful to Andrea for making her Zoom facility available. Christina and Chris, of course, have worked very hard to make today's session possible, and all to the advisory members. And thank you all for providing this opportunity. So, very quick introduction about myself. So I'm an associate professor of strategy at Gabelli School of Business in New York City, and also the associate director of Global Healthcare Innovation Management Center, where I work with the healthcare industry in general and the pharmaceutical sector in particular in various capacities. I've been a visiting faculty at various places, including Rotman School of Management at University of Toronto and NUS Business School, National University of Singapore. I'm also the co-founder of Cogneunce, a mental health startup that was essentially incepted in Singapore, but is now based in New York City. My research is mainly covers three areas: alliances and mergers and acquisitions, firm structure, and healthcare innovation. So it's at the cross-section of three topics. And with regard to teaching, I teach various courses, including core strategy courses, innovation and change management, and machine learning for strategic decision-making at both undergraduate and graduate level courses. So today's talk builds on my research in understanding how firms can leverage alliances to achieve superior performance. And I think it is necessary to clarify what I mean by an alliance from the perspective of a teacher. So any cooperative effort between two or more independent organizations to develop, manufacture, or sell products or services. That's what I mean by an alliance. So as you can see here on the right side, so you have the buy option, and on the left you have the make option. So essentially, when a firm wants to acquire a resource, a component, a technology, there are two extreme choices. One is to make it in-house, the other is just to acquire it and buy it on the market. And in between, we have other options. We have various forms of alliances with different governance structures. By the way, I'm going to leave a lot of statistics out today because I don't want to be preaching to the choir. I know that you all are familiar with the trends in the pharma industry and what is going on with the deals. And the important thing about alliances and what I mean by alliances is that they're governed by incomplete contracts. And this incompleteness in contracts gives them certain attributes, but also creates certain side effects that we will be talking about. Okay. Salman, can you see the slides? I'm just wondering.
Yes, we can see the slide very well.
Okay, great. So first let's look at the structure of biopharma alliances. And so first you choose a contract. Of course, alliances are generally most of the time, if they're serious alliances, they're governed by a contract. We can have co-development contracts, collaboration contracts, development contracts, co-promotion, co-marketing. And the definitions of these are fairly standard. If you look at the data across the industry, they're provided by different providers. Previously, we had Recap. Now we have other sources. And then you choose a governance mechanism that can range from no really governance, just a contract. It can be an equity investment, and the extreme form would be a joint venture where two firms form a third entity and they share their resources there. And they're quite popular. We know that in the pharma industry, particularly pharma industry, they're the major mode of resource exchange. Okay, and I have not seen alliances to this extent in any other industry. Okay, so in airline industry, yes, we do have alliances and they're quite popular, but they serve a different purpose. They're mostly downstream alliances, not really upstream alliances, but pharma industry, they play a very, very important role. And they're essentially what I call, they are like pipes and prisms of resources in this industry. They're part of the main architecture of the industry. So what are the features of this industry that make them so popular? One is extreme uncertainty. In pharma, we have extreme uncertainty. You work for 15 years on a molecule and it fails, okay? And frequent technological changes, okay? Starting from recombinant DNA, going to combinatorial chemistry, going to various phases of gene sequencing, all these technological changes, and then human genome map, and more recently, proliferation of data science and application of artificial intelligence. So you have frequent technological changes. And therefore, for that, when you have frequent technological changes, you would have extreme uncertainties, and you have, of course, it makes that feature makes M&As probably slightly risky because you are not very, very, very sure of the technological viability of your targets. Of course, M&As are there, but I'm going to leave M&As out of today's talk. They're light arrangements, they're flexible. This incompleteness of the contracts gives them some sort of flexibility. And they are complex. The industry is complex. Therefore, you need external expertise. You need external expertise from various sources. Okay, no company has all the resources that is needed to really develop a drug and then market it finally. If you look at the entire value chain. If we look at the trends, here I'm showing internal and external sources of drug marketed by bio and pharma firms, right? So in pharma, if you look at who initiated the drug and not who put the drug on the market, but who initiated the drug. In the bio, it is mostly internal sources, of course, and then some external sources. But in pharma, they usually use external sources, alliances, and acquisitions to access the initial molecule and then develop it further. In recent years, they have been quite popular. And something very interesting that in one of my papers I've seen is that now looking at bio and pharma alliances, they have been, of course, very popular. Starting in probably late 90s, you can see the popularity of bio and bio upstream relationships. So in terms of upstream relationships for research and development, you see that bio and bio is outnumbering pharma and bio alliances. And of course, pharma alliances. But the trend is upward. You are seeing more and more of alliances because of exactly the factors. So uncertainty is not reducing in the industry. In fact, it is increasing in the industry. So, but they are fragile, and that's the problem with alliances. Okay, so if you look at a sample of over 3,000 alliances, I have about 88% of alliances are terminated early before they really yield any results. Okay, and only close to 12% of them really serve their purpose. So a lot of them are terminated early, and that's not necessarily bad. Sometimes you have to terminate early. Okay, you don't want to really commit to a relationship and you know that it's not going to work for you. And if you look at the results of the reasons for termination and really what led to termination, There are some external forces, of course, right? Changes in the regulatory environment, changes in the market conditions that are not really in the hand of the firms, and they can't do anything about it. Okay. Some of them are just because they realize that, for example, the sales is low because the clinical trial is not working. But in majority of cases, it is partners' disagreement or change in the strategy, meaning that the firms form the relationship with a strategy in mind, but in between they change their strategy, or they had a disagreement. And this is probably an underestimation, because partner disagreements are rarely mentioned in the press releases. And by the way, this data is probably biased in some ways because it is based on press releases. And of course, press releases, you don't mention always the reason for termination. But it covers a wide range of firms across different countries. So probably in that sense, there is no difference between the observations. Okay, but really, where is the problem? Okay, where is the problem? This is a very interesting survey of 200 US firms by three very distinguished scholars, Jeff Dyer, Prashant Kale, and Harvey Singh at Wharton. And they asked 200 US executives, top firms, and asked them about alliances and acquisitions. And particularly the last question was very interesting to me. Has your company developed any specific policy guidelines or criteria for choosing between forming an alliance with and acquiring a potential partner? Is there really a specific guideline and policy in place or criteria? And 86% of them said no, and only 14% of them said yes. Okay. So what is the solution? What should we do? So alliance management. So really, I think successful formation and execution of alliances require understanding their nature. I think a lot of managers, a lot of practitioners probably they underestimate the difficulty of alliances. Okay, of course, we are all excited about alliances, about the deals. They're fantastic sources of exchanging resources. However, there are certain features of them that we have to recognize. One is the lack of control and hierarchy. Okay, difficulty of coordination and knowledge leakage. And they create concerns for the partners, and therefore they lead to their undermined effort in collaborating and sharing their resources. Let's zoom in a little bit. So here we have partner A and partner B. But of course, if we could zoom in and we go into the inside the company, we see that, okay, so we have the gateways, we have the interfaces, we have this human resource A, what I call an human resource B. This is, by the way, taken from another paper of mine, and they are collaborating. But while they are collaborating and they are the interfaces of their companies to the external partner, they also have commitment inside the firm. So they not only have to coordinate with outsiders, but they are also committed to their own organizations. And this feature has not been really explored. The difficulties that the gatekeeper of the alliance, the person, has in coordinating and acquiring resources within the firm, asking for the support of management. Okay, so what I have realized is that in one of my explorations is that the companies that have Office of Alliance Management, an official Office of Alliance Management, and specific policies in place, they perform better. And they usually go through two things. One is, first of all, formation. They're very careful about formation, but also adaptation. So alliances, that's important. So yes, you write a contract, but can you really adapt and change the alliance? And remember that these alliances are supposed to be malleable. So what they require nurturing. So they are not on autopilot. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so in terms of formation and adaptation, we have to look at alliances from two perspectives. One is, first of all, there are diet level issues. So you have a partner A and you have partner B. Sure, and they are working with that. But partner A is rarely forms with one alliance with only one company. Pfizer may have hundreds of partners at any point in time. Okay, the same is with even smaller companies. whether they are in Europe, they are in the US. Rarely companies have only one relationship, at least large firms. They have rather a portfolio of relationships, okay? And that's really where the problem starts. So in terms of that level issues, of course, partner selection. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on partner selection. That's quite obvious to a lot of people here. But choosing the right alliance governance structure is important. Okay, so you have to use these tools properly where it is needed. If you need really more control over resources, you have to go for what I call more hierarchical forms of alliances where you get more control over your resources. Okay, so control over resources increases as you go from non-equity to equity to joint ventures. It also makes partners' collaboration easier. Okay. However, it reduces flexibility because of sunk cost and because of the formalities that would be in place. Okay, so what is a good example of a company that could adapt and renegotiate? So this example is probably more familiar to you than it is to me, because in 2001, I was still in high school. So for a lot of you, this is probably a lot more familiar. So Salman is laughing. I don't know why he's laughing, but so Erbitux. Okay, so cetuximab is an epidermal growth factor receptor inhibitor medication that is used for the treatment of metastatic colorectal cancer and head and neck cancer. Of course, a lot of companies were involved in that. The origin of this country is the origin of this drug is Weizmann Institute in Israel, but a lot of companies were involved, but I'm particularly talking about BMS's alliance with ImClone Systems. By the way, they were initially thinking about Bristol BMS was thinking about acquiring ImClone and for $5 million. So instead of that, they formed an alliance. And the terms of the alliance is here, $1 billion for 20% equity that would be paid by BMS. Marketing rights to Erbitux will be given to BMS at the same time, but 40% of the annual profits will be given to BMS. But after advanced stages of clinical trial, BMS will invest more than $800 million in the deal. But however, in December of 2001, FDA declined the drug. Okay, but parties were able to renegotiate the deal. Okay. But the comment is that that's what I heard from a lot of executives and a lot of scholars, this was really an unusual case. In a lot of cases, firms have difficulty adapting and changing the terms of their agreement, even signing a new contract. Once the alliances are brittle, and that's one of the problems that they have. But they are brittle, but they're not costless. They cost a lot of money, as I think Salman was talking about Ulrich's experience with alliances. So they are expensive deals. They're not cheap. And also think about time that you spend, and also the opportunity cost. You have to deal. You could actually work with someone else, but you worked with another specific company, but that didn't really bear any fruit. Okay. So when it comes to portfolio level issues, so at the portfolio level, the problems that you have are often accentuated. Yes, you may have a lot of problems with your partners. For example, in this, imagine that the focal firm, has an alliance with partner one. And you may have a lot of relational problems with the first partner. But the interesting thing is that actually, when you have a portfolio of relationships, all your problems will be accentuated. The problems between your partners are now your problems too. And your partners may have problems. One of the issues that they may have is that they may be competitors with one another. Okay. And that can create its own problems and its own issues. And most firms really fail to see this issue. And it's probably because absence or weakness of leadership in alliances and having enough authority to really run the alliance. But what are the problems with competition? So you can see here. So when you have competitors in the portfolio, they're often concerned about the leakage of their intellectual property to other partners. okay? And they want specific policies in place, okay? Firms either put the wrong policy in place or they fail to see the issue, okay? In a paper that was published about 3 years ago, Creating and Taming Discord, How Firms Manage Embedded Competition in Alliance Portfolio to Limit Alliance Termination, with my colleagues at Temple University, at National University of Singapore, and NUS Business School. So we investigated this issue. What we found is that competition increases the hazard of early termination. The likelihood of early termination increases. So the more competitors you have in your portfolio, firms that compete with one another, the likelihood of termination, early termination, increases. So here you have the green lines. Green lines show cooperative relationships, while the dotted red lines show competitive relationships. And now here P1 is a competitor of P5 and P5 is a competitor of P4. And obviously these firms are concerned about the existence of their competitors in the portfolio. What we actually found is that, unlike the conventional wisdom, in equity investment does not help. So equity investment, the mechanism of equity investment is that it is supposed to align the interests of the partners, okay, and give the partners some sort of control over the deal, okay. Now, if F has equity investment in its relationship with partner 5, probably it can assure partner 5 that it is acting in the interest of partner 5. Okay. Yes, I know that your competitors are in the portfolio, but because I have an equity investment there and I have a vested interest in your company, I'm going to take care of this issue and make sure that the knowledge is not really leaked to your competitors. But we found that equity does not help. And this is confirmed in other studies that I have done. So I replicated this in various contexts, and I found similar results. So in a new paper, we are actually examining another solution, which is the Chinese wall policy or firewall policy in companies. Okay, this is quite popular in investment banking. Of course, this has been there, the Chinese wall policy, but it is becoming increasingly more popular in pharma. It has been there in semiconductor. This has been a long-term policy, and also in information technology. So the title of the paper, Divide to Unite: How Does Competition in a Firm's Alliance Portfolio Affect the Structure and Outcome of this Knowledge Production? We studied this. So what we found is that, yes, we found evidence through various statistical methods, and we also use natural language processing to measure competition, that competition between partners in a portfolio. Okay, so again, I'm going back. So you have the focal firm, and then you have competition among its partners. So the greater degree of competition increases segregation between the collaborators inside the company, between the knowledge workers. So each one of these dots on the left and on the right represent a scientist. Okay, and the ties between them is the co-patenting tie. So two dots are connected if they have co-patented in the past. And we find very strong evidence that firms put a policy of Chinese wall in place once they have greater competition. This is one of the things that not only they put that in place to attenuate the concerns of the members of the portfolio, but this is something that portfolio members demand from the focal firm. Okay, this is the knowledge network of Sangamo. So this is all the co-patenting relationship between scientists in 2003. On the right side, you have the 2004 collaboration network, and you can see the segregation of knowledge workers increases. Well, you may think that a lot of firms may think that this solves the problem. Okay, probably it does. Okay, it may attenuate competing partners' concerns. However, we find that beyond the point, it may undermine inventiveness, because now you are creating silos. Okay, so we measure grid disconnectedness through some sort of, I'm not going to talk about mathematics of this, but we can quantify disconnectedness in a graph of collaboration, and we found that it leads to lower quality of invention. It also reduces the capability of the firm to build on its own knowledge. Okay, so you invested in knowledge, you patented, but can you really build on that for the next generation of technology? And we quantitatively showed that it leads to lower, what we call generative appropriability. So in conclusion, so alliances are critical to the vitality of the industry, but they're notoriously hard to manage. They need to be nurtured. They can't be on autopilot. They require proactive management and adaptation. And exactly because they are hard, exactly because they are difficult to manage, that's why they can be a source of competitive advantage. So to answer the question of this panel, yes, they can be a source of competitive advantage. A lot of companies manage to form fantastic alliances. A recent example of that is Pfizer and BioNTech. Yes, they can be a source of competitive advantage, but they are difficult. And they are the source of competitive advantage exactly because they are difficult and not everyone can pull them off successfully. Thank you very much. So shall we open it to Q&A, Salman?
Once again, on behalf of all of us, Navid, thank you so much for an excellent presentation, which has actually, and that was the whole idea, which has actually given us not only food for thought, but has raised even more questions about how to make these alliances work in the industry. Our next session is going to be in April. That's a very interesting session, by the way. That is going to be the CEO of a biotech, probiotic company, a French company called Targetis. And they'll be talking about something very different. He will be talking about the gut microbiome axis. That's something which is affecting all of us. But how do you make success out of that kind of technology, so to say? Last but not least, a huge thank you to Andre Bates, who's sitting in London. Thanks to her, we've been able to use once again, or misuse once again, her Zoom facility. We will, by the way, also thanks to Andre, we will be starting very shortly a YouTube channel where all presentations that we have will be put on that channel. So with that, once again, thank you so much to everybody and to Navid in particular, and also to Andre, and until soon again.